On the 27th of March 2025, as many of you will know, the Westminster Quaker Meeting House was raided, and there was a huge amount of press coverage around this and quite a lot of Quaker response to it. And I noticed that I have a different perspective, perhaps in four different ways, as much as I can see, about the way in which Quakers have responded to this event. The first thing I want to say is the condemnation and the outrage. So much of the Quaker response was showing outrage, anger. Now, I do understand that it's a shocking experience and distressing. You know, police have work to do across the country, and obviously, people caught up in that, it's shocking. But I just want to contrast the Quaker messaging around this with the Churches Together in England response. When they wrote a letter to the police commissioner, they used the word dismay. Member churches were dismayed to learn of the raid. And I think that's about right, you know. I think that's over emotional messaging around our response to it is not at all helpful. And actually, I suppose one of the things I'm thinking about here is as religious people, you have to be very careful that you're not making out that your suffering is so much worse than the suffering going on up and down the country all the time. I mean, clearly there are people being arrested all the time, and bystanders are unfortunately caught up and doors are broken in. And this is not ideal, is it? It's upsetting. Um, but to make out that our building being broken into is somehow worse, I didn't like that at all. I do notice that in the recent podcast that has just included some further reflections a month or two on now from various senior people. They're talking about sacred space and recognizing that we don't believe that our buildings are particularly sacred, and we make our meetings sacred. So they've kind of fudged that and now talked about it being our home. And yes, homes are broken into, and it's very distressing. But I just don't think it's helpful at all to be having an over egging it, maybe is the simplest way to put it. The second thing is the cup of tea business. Now, I don't want to criticize the elder who made those decisions. These are shocking and upsetting events to take part in and or to be involved in. Um, so it's no criticism of one individual. We have to decide what it is we're going to do in reaction to these things. But the Christian thing is harder than the religious response is harder than just our own human individual actions. And it's a very human response. It's a very British response. I mean, it certainly made me laugh when the headlines across the world, I think, talked about, and we didn't offer him a cup of tea. Um, and I thought, but that is the Christian thing to do. You do offer tea. That's the point. So that was a real shame, I think, that, again, messaging going out to the world that that it was just disappointing. And again, I notice in the podcast that came out yesterday, there's been some thinking around that as well, and perhaps that the elder concerned has been rethinking whether he might have reacted differently. I mean, go easy on yourself, friend, because it is hard. It's hard, but that is the challenge, isn't it, of a religious response to in the face of distress and aggression or violence is how do we be truly peaceful and generous. The third thing, which I seem to have been out of step with many Quakers, was one of the conversations the conversation boards, if you like, I think it was on Facebook or something. I made the comment, that these young people who would have been arrested, youth demand, I think, youth demand. Uh, it's not exactly a Quaker Anyway, it's not a Quaker thing, is it? Um, they would have been buzzing. I said, wow, they would have achieved all of their campaign aims in one evening, you know. By the next day, they almost didn't need to cause any disruption to London spaces because they'd already had, I don't know how many tens of thousands of hits they got on their website. I certainly did. Who are they? What are they trying to achieve, And I think, oh, right, okay, they're kind of similar to Just Stop Oil or those kinds of campaigning groups. And when I said, they're going to be buzzing with this is great. People, other Quakers were kind of disagreeing with me on this. And again, the messaging was around all these poor young people have been distressed. Now, I'm not saying it's not distressing. I think it is. It's bound to be a shock to be suddenly arrested like that. And I don't dismiss those concerns at all. However, when they've got back home and they've, had a cup of tea and they've been comforted and got their stuff back, and got over the shock of it, because this is the kind of work and campaigning that they've committed themselves to do, their own witness, if you like. Once they've got over that shock, I'm sure they've been buzzing about it, and I think I've seen some other reflections. In fact, there was something in the Friend, wasn't there, just a few weeks ago? Again, a Quaker attender, I think she said, said that actually they thought this was great. And she was noticing an age difference between the young people who'd been involved and young people observing this were buzzing. And I think that was my word rather than hers. Whereas perhaps the older Quakers were a bit shocked on their behalf and distressed. And then the fourth one, I mean, I'm going to say this. This thing about, Quakers have not been arrested in living memory. I'm getting the sense, if I'm honest, that there's some enjoyment here that at last Quakers can be victims. At last Quakers can claim we are being persecuted. And I just think this is a dreadful line of messaging to take. Um, to claim any similarities at all. I mean, for a start, these young people weren't Quakers. It wasn't a meeting for worship. To make any of those kinds of comparisons, what with the persecution of the 17th century, I mean, it's just, it's not appropriate. So I think this, delight that somehow we can kind of go around and claim that we're now victims, which people did do. Other Quakers who I'm in contact with, I could see it all over the message boards that there was some people making these claims. So I hope all of those things have been rolled back, and I can already start to see that there's some rethinking on this. But I must admit, it does concern me that some of the messaging going out it's not what I would it's often not what I would my instincts would have been on these issues. So I mean I thought Siobhan did a better job than some. Um so yes, there's my take if you like. I hope that we can settle down when these kinds of things happen and not make much bigger claims, especially to victimhood, than we have been doing. So there you go, four unpopular opinions, an alternative Quaker view of some of these events. Thank you, friends.